They were right. Liz was there, dancing with a man. Dancing is a relative term. It was obvious she was drunk. And I walked over to them, took her hands off his neck, and started pulling her away. Hey, man, what the hell do you think you're doing? Her dance partner asked. She's my wife, and I'm taking her home, I said. Any resistance he wanted to put up immediately ceased. She's all yours, he said. Anyway, when she's drunk, it's no good having fun with her. And when she's sober? I asked, lifting her in my arms to carry her outside. Oh, she's great then. Ask anyone. We all think she's one of the best. Someone opened the door for me, and I carried her to my pickup and put her in the passenger seat. It only took a few minutes to get her to my parents' house, where they watched as I unceremoniously dumped her on the bed. She was out like a light. Hell, she was probably passed out from having her ass fondled on the dance floor. I didn't say a word as I left. Ruth was my older sister. She was one of my two sisters. The other was Esther Jacobs. I also have two brothers, Matthew and Luke Reynolds. My name is Mark Reynolds. Our parents were lifelong Southern Baptists, so all five of us children were baptized at Citico Creek in Vonore, Tennessee, and grew up attending church every Wednesday night and all Sunday morning. We never had a television, but we did have a radio, which was only allowed to play gospel music on Sundays. Of course, when we were away from our parents or they from us, all the hidden gadgets came out. We tried to keep them out of Mom and Dad's sight, but I'm sure they knew about them. Our parents learned to read so they could read the Bible, and it was the only thing they ever read. We grew up in poverty. All five of our children realized early on that they didn't want the same lifestyle as our parents. When each of us graduated from high school, we couldn't wait to leave Vonore. Ruth and Matthew made it to Nashville. Esther and Luke only made it as far as Madisonville. Neither of them went to college. Ruth always knew how to cook and started working as a cook's helper at a diner. Matthew went to truck driving school where he fell into a pile of manure and came out of there smelling like a rose. One of the instructors took him under his wing, and when he graduated, the instructor got him a job as a driver for one of Nashville's megastars. That kind of job is worth its weight in gold, and usually only older, well-connected, experienced drivers get it, but his instructor had his man. Matthew turned out to be a much better than average truck driver, and he had a personality that suited him just fine. I was a little different. After high school, I went to Vanderbilt University on a 4-year Army ROTC scholarship, and upon graduation, I attained the rank of second lieutenant. My first assignment after Officer Basic Course was to 8th Army Headquarters in Korea. I served there for 13 months, after which I returned home on a 30-day leave of absence and went to my next duty station at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I spent a few days with my parents and then traveled to Nashville to visit Ruth. Our brother Matthew was on tour somewhere. He was driving one of several trucks carrying equipment for the Stars show. Lights, rigging, everything needed to put on a big Nashville show was in the trucks. Ruth had a small apartment, and I slept on her couch. She was dating a man she had met in a cooking class she had taken at the local community college. His name was Gerald Thompson. Gerald had a sister named Elizabeth, but everyone called her Liz. One night, the four of us went out to dinner. Then Liz and I went alone. Then we went out again. By the time my vacation was over, Liz and I were pretty much in a relationship. Fort Campbell was only an hour away from Nashville, so I spent a lot of time there, and Liz spent a lot of time in Campbell. 18 months after we met, we were married. Liz was a Nashville native and had never lived anywhere else. Her father was a urologist, and her mother was a stay-at-home mom. Liz and I did a 3-year internship at Campbell before being sent to Germany. Germany was a huge culture shock for both of us. Liz participated in the Rookie Club and the Officers' Wives Club. She learned to play bridge and played weekly with the other wives. We also joined the traveling club. Once a month we traveled to different places: Italy, Switzerland, Spain, and so on. In the last few months of our 3-year trip, she started to really enjoy European wine. I grew up in a non-drinking family and never acquired a taste for alcohol. Our next assignment was to Fort Campbell, which pleased us both. We moved into government quarters and were happy for about 6 months. It was then that Liz started spending a lot of time in Nashville. We would go away for the weekend and she wanted to stay an extra day or so. That turned into an extra 3 days. By the end of the year, she was actually living with her parents. I traveled there on the weekends. The only sign of trouble was that one Friday I showed up at her parents' house and Liz wasn't there. They had no idea where she was. I had gotten off early and arrived just after lunch. Her mother made excuses that they weren't expecting me so early. I started to bring my bag into Liz's room, but her mother tried to stop me. "Give me a chance to clean up first," she said. "It's okay," I said. The room was a mess. There were dirty clothes lying everywhere. I thought it was odd that the bed was made up with dirty clothes, but it was obvious that it was made up and hadn't been slept on. It was obvious by the amount of dirty clothes piled up that it hadn't been slept on for at least a couple nights. Her mother tried to pick up the dirty clothes. I managed to escort her out of the room by telling her I needed to use the bathroom. Her mother was on the phone, but hung up as soon as she saw me. "How long has she been sleeping with other men?" I asked. "I think that's something we need to discuss with her," her mother said. "Are you coming back?" her mother asked. I didn't answer and headed straight for Ruth's house. She and Liz's brother had stopped seeing each other a couple years ago, but remained friends. Since then, Ruth had met and married a music store owner named Eric Wyndham. Liz and I traveled back to the States for their wedding. I called Ruth on the way to her house and she told me where she had the key hidden. She was busy, so we couldn't talk. She did tell me that she wouldn't be at work until midnight because she had to close the restaurant that night. At her house, I tried calling Liz, but no one answered, so I left a message. "It's your husband. You know, the only man you should be sleeping with. I would like to hear your explanation as to why that is no longer the case. I would also like to know how many others there have been and why." Eric got home around 7, and I brought him up to speed. Ruth called a little after 8. She told me that she had just gotten a call from her ex-boyfriend, Liz's brother. He, in turn, had just heard from his friend that Liz had gotten drunk and was flirting with several men at the Count Monte music bar. He was going to pick her up and take her home. Ruth told him not to worry. I was there and would take care of it. When I threw her on the bed, both of her parents were there. Her mother started berating me, saying that whatever Liz did was my fault because I took her to Germany where she learned to drink and do all sorts of nasty and evil things. I looked at them both, walked out, and headed back to Ruth's house. Eric and I chatted until Ruth got home, and then we stayed and chatted the three of us until 3 o'clock. I slept on their couch again. Waking up at 7, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down on the porch of their house, preparing to talk to Liz. Ruth and Eric joined me at 9. We talked for another hour or so. They were interested in what I was going to do, and I told them I had no idea. The next day, it was already 10 o'clock when I rang my in-laws' doorbell. Liz's father opened the door and stepped aside so I could enter. Liz was sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee. I walked over to her and dropped my soiled underwear on the coffee cup. She picked them up, dropped them on the floor, brought the cup to her lips, and took a sip. "Why?" I asked Liz. "You don't have to answer that question, honey," her mother interjected. "Stay out of it," said I coldly. "Why?" repeated I to Liz. She looked up at me. "I needed to be loved and you weren't here." "How many times have you needed to be loved and I wasn't here?" "What?" "How many times have you had fun with other men?" "I don't know." "Guess." "A couple dozen." "How many different men?" "I don't know." "Guess." 6, maybe 7, maybe 10. I'm not sure. "Does our marriage mean anything to you?" She lifted her head and looked straight at me and took another sip of coffee, answering nothing. I walked out and went back to Ruth. It didn't take long to tell her what had happened. "And she didn't repent? Didn't apologize?" asked Ruth. "No." "Now that's a cold-hearted woman," she said. "That's exactly what I thought," I said. There was no point in staying in Nashville, so I headed for Fort Campbell. Sunday afternoon, I was surprised when Liz walked into our house. I stretched out on the couch and she crouched on the arm on the side where my feet were. She sat like that for a couple minutes. I'm sorry, she said. Don't say another word. If the only reason you cheated is because I wasn't around when you needed to have fun, that's pretty pathetic because you purposely didn't leave the house so I couldn't take care of you or your needs. You chose to get drunk and sleep with strangers instead of coming home and sleeping with your husband. That's a pretty pathetic excuse for destroying a marriage. And your parents are just as guilty as you are for letting you do it. The only thing you can do now is pack your bags and leave. I don't want to leave. I said I was sorry. It won't happen again. I don't care how many times it happens again. As far as I'm concerned, we're not married anymore, so you can do whatever you want and with whomever you want. All I care about is that you're leaving. I grabbed the remote and turned on the TV. She snatched it out of my hands and hit the mute button. I'm not leaving. You're my husband, and this is my home. She tossed the remote back to me and left the room. She made dinner, and I made a sandwich and ate in the living room. She ate everything she made and stayed in the kitchen. When it was time to go to bed, I took a shower and went to bed. She showered and got into bed, snuggling as close to me as she could. I rolled over. Do you seriously think we're going to get anywhere after your body has been used by 6, 7, or 10 other men? I said I was sorry. And you think that made things better? Yes. You are in serious need of help. I can't forbid you to sleep in this bed, but I shouldn't stay here and think about all those men having fun with you. I went into the living room and fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, she was sitting in the chair watching me. I ignored her, showered, shaved, put on my uniform, and went to work. After reporting back, I spoke to the commander and brought him up to speed. If I were you, the first thing I'd do is contact a lawyer. Take as much time as you need. I talked to several attorneys that day and settled on Kirby Dickinson. He was a retired Army lawyer and knew what military personnel had to deal with. What do you want from me and why? He asked. I need your advice because I have no idea what I'm doing, I replied. Do you want to try to save a marriage? No. Why? Because she cheated and I won't tolerate a spouse cheating. How do you know she cheated? I said to him. That doesn't mean squat in a court of law, Lieutenant. I was first lieutenant by then. She could tell you and 100 other people she had sex with both the Army and Navy football teams on the 50-yard line with a full stadium watching, then deny it when she gets in front of a judge, and the judge will believe her unless you have proof. He shook his head. Those are just facts. He paused. So, since you don't want to save the marriage, then you want a divorce. Am I right? Yes, sir. I suppose so. And I guess you don't want it to be easy for her. Am I right again? Yes, sir. You're right again. Good. I like it when people agree with me. It reinforces what I already know. And what's that? That I'm a smart son of a bitch. We both laughed. Here's what I think you should do. If she lives with you, tolerate her in silence. Ignore her, even if she screams and yells and throws shit at you. If you're lucky, she'll leave and go home to her mom or her boyfriend or somewhere else away from you. When she does, she will in all likelihood go back to her old adulterous habits and find someone to sleep with. When she does, all we need to do is make sure there is someone around to film it. When we get to court, even if the judge says we can't use the videotape, he will know that you are telling the truth and your wife really did cheat on you. I can almost promise that he or she will rule in your favor. That's the way it works in Kentucky. The minus of this plan is that someone will have to be available 24/7 to film her shenanigans, and it won't be cheap, but I guarantee it will save you in the long run. Do you agree? Absolutely. Good. Write a check for my fee, and then write a check for the detective I'll find for you. I felt better, but even poorer when I got back to my office. Liz had called me at 6 o'clock that evening, and per Kirby Dickinson's instructions, I didn't answer. It was past 10 when I entered the house. She was waiting for me. How long is this going to go on? She asked. I've apologized. Now we can go back to normal. I ignored her and headed for the shower. 20 minutes later, I was in bed and heard her car pull away. I got up and looked in our shared closet, but almost all of her clothes were gone. I went back to bed and fell asleep. The next morning, I called Kirby Dickinson and told him she'd left, probably for Nashville. That's great. I have some acquaintances there. Do you have any idea where she might go? I gave him her parents' address. Okay, game on, he said. It was less than a week later, and I had a video of her having fun with two men. 48 hours after I received the video, she was served papers demanding that our marriage be dissolved due to adultery. Less than an hour after receiving the papers, she called and begged me in tears to forgive her. I hung up. I brought my boss up to speed. He had gone through the same thing a few years earlier. The difference was that his wife had cheated on him while he was in a war zone. This is without a doubt the worst thing a spouse can do. Cheat while a service member is in harm's way. My next step was to notify Post Housing that I was vacating my quarters. The next day I moved into BOQ, Bachelor Officers' Quarters. 3 days after that, Liz called to say she couldn't get into the house. I told her it wasn't our house anymore. I had moved out because she had left me and I wasn't eligible for housing as a single officer. But you're not single. You're married, she said. I laughed and pressed the end call button. I guess she was back in Nashville. As I mentioned, I don't like to drink alcohol. It started with my Southern Baptist upbringing, but even as an adult, I never got addicted to it. It was the same with swearing. I never got used to swearing. Other people drinking and using coarse language were perfectly normal. They just weren't for me. Likewise, I'm not a prude. Close-up dancing is great if you are dancing with your wife or girlfriend. Looking at naked or nearly naked women is nice too. I like a woman's body, and if she wants to show it off, I'm certainly willing to look. That night, however, I used every four-letter word I had ever heard, and some I probably made up, as I watched a video of my wife having fun with two men. I turned on the video on my computer. It started with her dancing on the dance floor with two men at the same time. And this went on for several minutes until they left the dance floor, walked out of the building, and got into a car. The detective followed them to a cheap, one-story motel where the three of them rented a room. Through the window, the detective was able to film the whole process. It was disgusting. I didn't watch it for long. I hit the pause button. I turned off the computer. There was no way I could explain her behavior. She said she was doing it because she needed love, and I wasn't there for her. I had no experience with cheating wives, but that was one of the flimsiest excuses for cheating ever. When I confronted her, she didn't even try to deny it. That week at work, after watching part of the video, was a godsend. I was busy all day, every day, so the memories of the video faded somewhat. Kirby Dickinson called me on Friday and told me that we had an appointment with her and her attorney on Monday. When I arrived, her parents were with her. I asked Kirby to tell them that we were going to show the video and it would be best if her parents were not there. He told Liz's lawyer about it. We saw him talking to the three of them. I saw Liz shake her head, refusing. I heard her say, "I don't believe them." Okay. The gloves were off, and as Kirby had said before, game on. It didn't take long. Her attorney demanded that adultery be excluded as a cause of divorce. Mental cruelty should be substituted in its place because I had caused her so much mental anguish that she couldn't be around me. That is why she was forced to actually live with her parents. Kirby and I looked at each other. My computer was on my desk, and the video was on exactly where I had stopped it. I looked at them all. "Elizabeth," I said. I only called her that on very rare occasions to get her attention. "Are you sure you want your parents to see this?" "See what?" "Me holding hands with some guy, or dancing with him. You pick whichever is better." I pressed play, and the whole room saw it. Her mother had passed out, and her father was trying to bring her to her senses, all the while glancing at his daughter. When the mother came to her senses, Her father looked at her. I want you out of our house. Today. He and his wife had no problem with her cheating until they saw the extent of her debauchery. He carefully helped his wife up and started to leave the room. He stopped when he reached me. You shouldn't have done that, you know. Would you have believed me if I hadn't? I asked. No, probably not. But there might have been a better way. There was. Your daughter didn't need to be deceived. We never heard from them again, and when we were scheduled for trial, neither Liz nor her lawyer showed up. 6 weeks later, I was a free man with all of our meager possessions and no child support. 6 more weeks and I was ordered to go play sand trap in the Middle East. I spent 2 days with Ruth and her husband and then headed home to spend time with my parents and other siblings. I drove my truck to my parents' house and left it with my dad to use and watch over it while I was gone. Matthew was on another tour with his megastar. My other two siblings were still in Madisonville. Both were married and had children. I survived my year in the sand trap with nothing but unpleasant memories. However, I returned with the rank of captain, which was nice. My new assignment took me to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where I commanded a garrison at the Command and General Staff College. It was an elective assignment for any captain, but to be assigned there as a very junior captain with no command experience was a mistake. I even called my office in Washington to confirm this. Are you complaining, Captain Reynolds? Because if so, there are a couple hundred other captains who would be happy to take your place. No, I'm perfectly happy. I just wanted to make sure someone wouldn't notice the mistake and reassign me in 3 months. No, Captain Reynolds. You're locked up for 3 years unless, of course, we need you back in the sand trap. If that happens, you can send one of those couple hundred other captains you mentioned in my place. We both laughed. It didn't take me long to get into a nice, steady rhythm. Of course, it didn't hurt that I had an experienced first sergeant doing everything for me. One Saturday, I was in the auto repair shop on post. It had facilities and equipment for minor repairs to our personal vehicles. There was even an experienced mechanic there to help those who needed it. I wasn't an expert, but I had grown up in the countryside and knew the difference between a spark plug and a nut, so I was quite capable of doing it myself. There weren't many people around when I arrived, so I started the oil change. There were 3 pits to change the oil and work under the car. I had been in my pit for about 5 minutes when another car pulled into the pit next to me. I didn't pay attention to it until I heard it. Goddamn piece of shit! It came in a soft but determined female voice. It got quiet again until the wrench fell and hit the concrete floor. Oops! Damn it! I heard. I grinned to myself and decided that maybe the voice needed help. I tightened the drain plug and climbed the steps out of the pit. I walked down the steps to the pit next to mine. She was wearing a jumpsuit 2 sizes larger. Do you need help? I asked. She turned to look at me, and I could see that underneath the layer of oil was an attractive face. She spit out a mouthful of oil and looked at me. What makes you think I need help? Because I'm a woman and women don't know how to change oil? Well, no. It just seemed to me that you were upset, and I thought I could help. No, thanks. I know what I'm doing. I just hate this piece of shit. Okay, have a good day. I went to my car, put oil in it, and drove away, never seeing her again. The next week, I was at a cocktail party the Commander General was throwing. I was invited only because I was the garrison commander, not because I was part of the rare atmosphere of 3 generals and countless colonels serving at Fort Leavenworth. I bought some cocaine and wandered around wondering if there were any other officers of my age and rank with whom I had anything in common. I didn't expect to find any, and I wasn't disappointed. I looked at my watch and decided that from a protocol standpoint, I had another 15 minutes before I could gracefully exit. The backyard looked like a promising place, and I headed that way. I was on my way out the door when I heard a voice. Anyway, my dad made me learn how to do things on my own in case I ever found myself in a pinch, so I decided to change the oil myself. It took me over an hour, and I had oil from my hair to my fingernails, including my mouth. I even spilled it on the manual, which made it almost impossible to read. But the worst part was that this incredibly cute guy offered to help me, and I said I didn't need anything. If I had any common sense, I would have asked for help just to get his name and phone number. The group she was with all laughed until another female voice spoke up. What do you mean you'd ask for his name and phone number? You've never done that before. I know, but there was something about his face that made me. I don't know. I can't really explain it. There was just something about him. And I saw it, even though I was angry and upset. Wow, he must have been something special. I guess so. I grinned to myself and tried to look at the person I was talking to. I wanted to see what she looked like without the oil. I walked through the patio doors and looked left, then right. There were 3 women standing to my right. One of them was about my age, maybe a couple years younger, but who knows? Our eyes met for the briefest of moments, after which I turned and walked back into the house. I knew she recognized me. I found a corner where I could stand back and watch. The 3 women stepped inside and immediately headed for the front door. In most military homes, just outside the front door is a stand with a cup, saucer, or metal tray where military guests leave one of their business cards with their name and rank. And you left one every time you were a guest in the house. The women walked over to the tray of business cards and began going through them. Finding one, they gathered around each other to examine it before looking at me. I tried to be as inconspicuous as possible, but being the only company-grade officer, second lieutenant, first lieutenant, or captain, in a house full of field-grade officers, major and above, was quite amusing. They would have no trouble figuring out which card was mine. I was in uniform and the only officer below major. All they had to do was look through all the cards until they got to mine. Plus, the name tag on my uniform said Reynolds in large letters. I was trying to decide if I should ask her about the car, thus identifying myself, or wait and see what they, or rather she, was going to do. I hadn't had a real date in a long time. When my mental protocol timer went off, I made my way to the hostess, the wife of Major General Morris T. Woodley, thanked her for a wonderful time, found my hat, which wasn't difficult since it was the only one on the table without an egg, gold braid, on the bill. Twice I furtively glanced at the 3 women, who were just as furtively watching me. The mystery lady and I had 2 areas in common. First, the general's party, and second, the machine shop. I couldn't hang around the general's house hoping she would show up, but I could hang around the machine shop. Saturday morning, I was washing and waxing my truck at the machine shop. I took my time and was almost done when I saw her car pull up to the house. She got out of the car, and she wasn't wearing overalls. She was wearing jeans and a white t-shirt with gold sequins on the front. Nah. My truck was parked inside the building and she parked outside. She got out of the truck and was heading in my direction when she was met by a man I recognized as a major from BOQ. He started talking to her, and it looked like she wanted to walk away from him, but he held her back in the conversation. We held each other's gaze for a full second before I turned away. I was done, and there were already 2 people waiting in my spot, so I couldn't wait any longer. I had to leave. Her eyes didn't take her eyes off me as I got in my truck and drove away. I pulled over to the side of the road and waited. Less than 5 minutes later, I saw her rushing in my direction, so I pulled off the road and headed toward the postal store. PX is the Army equivalent of Walmart. It was crowded, and I had to park pretty far from the entrance. There were several reserved parking spaces right by the entrance. The one closest to the door said it was reserved for the Commander General. Her car was parked in that spot. I almost turned around and drove home. Good thing I didn't. She was standing right in front of the door when I walked in. Playing hard to get? It was the first thing she said, but she said it with a smile. No, ma'am. Why? Are you trying to get me? She laughed out loud. That's an interesting question. I'm not sure. Can you be caught? Maybe, but I'm not cheap. She pointed to a snack stand at the end of the hallway. Would a Coke be okay? It was my turn to laugh. Unless you're expecting too much. At the kiosk, we each grabbed a Coke. She had a diet one, so she paid for both. We sat down at a table and the 3 hours flew by. Her phone rang at least 6 times, but she paid no attention to it. Finally, she glanced at her watch and jumped up. Shit, I have a date, I have to go. I stood up. Now who's playing hard to get now? We walked to her car and she drove off to her date. I hadn't had dinner at a nice restaurant in a while, so I decided to go to the Officers Club. Their prime rib was excellent. I went into my BOQ, hung out for a while, showered, put on my civilian suit, and headed to the club. The dining room was closed because of the party, but the grill was open, so I sat there and ate. After eating, I headed for the door, and as I passed by, I peeked into the dining room. Right in the doorway, dancing close together, stood the major from BOQ and, it dawned on me that I didn't know her name. In the entire time we had been talking, I had never once asked her name, and she had never once volunteered it. I stood and watched them dance until another couple bumped them, and she looked in my direction. I turned and headed for the door. The BOQ club was a short walk away, so I headed there. There was a large lobby with 2 large TVs, a bar, and a snack table that was loaded with Officers Club. I sat there, drank a Coke, and watched reruns of NASCAR races. I had been there for about 2 hours and was ready to head to my room when the major walked in. He got himself a beer and sat in the big chair next to mine. He asked me about the race, and I said I hadn't paid any attention to it. "You're the garrison commander, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes." He held out his hand. "Ernie Bigelow, Post G3, Operations Division." "Mark Reynolds, you already know where I work." We sat and talked. He was a nice, friendly type who was easy to talk to, so after a while I told him I'd seen him dancing earlier at the club. "Your date seemed familiar." He grinned. "She should. She's General Woodley's daughter, Christina." "Not to get personal, but do you have a thing for her?" I asked. He laughed. "Hell no. No one has anything with Miss Iceberg. I've met her a few times, and every time I thought I'd get to first base, she'd cut me off at the knees." "Then why do you keep coming back?" I asked. "Again, I don't know. Either I'm hoping to unfreeze her or I'm a glutton." He looked at me. "It's funny that you're asking me who she is because she saw you tonight and asked me if I knew who you were." He laughed. Not wanting any more competition, I told her I didn't know. Ernie Bigelow and I became friends. 3 days later, Christina Woodley called me and invited me to dinner. I accepted. That same evening, I was sitting in the BOQ lobby, and Ernie was sitting next to me. He looked at me. "I hear you have a date with Christina." "Yes, Friday for dinner. How did you know?" "Because I called and asked her out. She wasn't shy about telling me she had a date, and with who, or is it who?" "That was a surprise to me," I said. "She knows her phone number very well. Would you mind telling me how you got it?" "I don't have it. She didn't give it to me." "Then how did you ask her out? It's not like you can just walk up and knock on her door." I stammered. "I didn't ask her out. She called and asked me herself." I didn't think about how she got my number. She had my name on the business card I'd left at her house, and she had access to the postal phone book. Simple as that. He looked at me and started laughing. "Well, I'll be damned. I've known her for almost 2 years, and she's never once asked a guy out. You must be special." "I don't know about that." "Look, she goes on dates, but rarely. Since I've been here, she's only dated me and 2 others. We're a pretty tight group, and we keep an eye on each other, hoping to hear if either of us has made any progress. For now, a few close, slow dances and a couple kisses on the cheek is all she can do." We sat and talked, and as I said, became friends. He was sincere when he wished me luck with Christina. "Just keep me posted, and I'll make sure the other 2 know about you and your progress." Our dinner date went well. So well, in fact, that I asked her out. And so on and so forth. Ernie found out he was being transferred to Korea and offered to take her to a farewell dinner, but she turned him down. Her exact words, or so he said, were, "I like Mark, Ernie. I like him very much, and I don't want to put him in danger." I always took her out of the house for our dates and socialized with both of her parents. They certainly didn't hate me, but at the same time, they didn't welcome me with open arms either. In the 7th month of our acquaintance, I received orders to return to the sandbox in the Middle East. I called my unit and asked about it. I thought I had a 3-year stabilized tour, I told my assignment manager. You were, Mark, but you must have pissed someone off because we've been ordered to reassign you immediately. You're due to arrive in the country in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Everyone gets at least 30 days. I called Christina. She was even more upset than I was. We talked for a few more minutes, and when we were done talking, she said, I love you, Mark. She had never said that before. At 9 o'clock the next evening, I was packed and ready to leave the next morning. Christina was going to stop by to say goodbye. There was a knock on my door. I opened it, and it was her. She put her arms around me and we kissed. My dad did it, she announced. Did what? Sent you away. Why? He knows how I feel about you, and he's afraid he'll lose me. He will eventually. Me or someone else. What do you mean by someone else? We don't have anyone else. Eventually will if I don't come back. She hugged me again. Don't say that. She pulled away and looked at me. Marry me, she said. What? Marry me. It'll fix him. I laughed. Marrying me just to piss off your father is no reason to get married. She pulled away from me and lowered herself into a chair. Then I'll stay here tonight. That will make him very angry. I laughed again. I'd love to stay the night with you, but you just had a fight with your father. Where do you think he'll send the MPs first thing if you don't come home? Then let's go to a motel outside the post. I knelt down in front of her. I love you. Our first night together won't be a night of revenge or hiding. We will hold our heads up proudly and declare our love to the whole world. She took my face in her hands, kissed me, and laughed. I've already done that. Everyone in Leavenworth knows I love you, especially my father. That's why he reassigned you. We sat huddled together in the chair. The problem was that I loved her and wanted our first time to be perfect, and it wasn't. We were kissing when her phone rang. Hi, Mom, she said, putting it on speaker. Where are you? I heard her mother ask. At the BOQ with Mark. When are you coming home? When Mark leaves tomorrow. She looked at me and grinned. There was a sharp intake of breath. You know your father is going to kill you both, don't you? He already did, Mom, when he transferred Mark. What should I tell him? Tell him I'm grown up and I'll do what I want. Goodbye, Mom. You know the MPs are probably on their way, I said. I don't care. That's because you'll just go home, and I'm going to jail. She threw herself into my arms. We hugged and kissed for a long time. Then she looked into my eyes. I love you. You know that. I've never been in love before, and I know you love me. Would you like to know how I know that? Yes, I said. You've made no attempt to go any further. That shows that you respect me and don't rush things. You and I both know it's going to happen. You'll be the first man to do it with me. Early the next morning, I was waiting for Major General Second Rank Woodley when he arrived at his headquarters. When his driver pulled up, I was already opening the door for him. When he saw me, he was surprised. He knew me, of course. Why are you here, Captain? He asked. I'm here to tell you what a cowardly father I think you are. You may be a good general, but as a parent, you suck. You can send me anywhere you want, including the federal prison on the other side of this facility. But I'll say my word. I love your daughter, and she says she loves me. This is probably new to you because, if I understand the situation correctly, she's never been in love before, and that scares you because one day you're going to lose her to another man. It could be me, Ernie Bigelow, some private in a military camp, or a civilian doctor, but one day you will lose her, and when you do, I hope it will be as painful for you as it was for her, that you threw your weight around and transferred me. When you see her at dinner tonight, I want you to look at her knowing that you broke her heart, because you did. She could easily forget about me for the next year, which I'm sure is what you want. But she will fall in love again, and probably one more time. And each time, you'll lose more and more of her until she hates you. I didn't even greet him as I left. I fully expected to be stopped when I left my post and thrown in jail, but that didn't happen. I drove to my sister Ruth's house and then to my parents' house. I intended to leave my truck at their place for the duration of my absence. The few personal belongings I had, I put in storage. I spent one day at Ruth's house. During my stay with them, she brought me up to speed on my ex-wife. Her parents disowned her when they saw a videotape of her with two men and never spoke to her again after she moved out of their home. Her brother, Ruth's former boyfriend, also disowned her. She has been arrested at least 3 times for prostitution and selling drugs and is now in jail. After I left Ruth, I spent 3 days with my parents. I had many conversations with Christine before I left and learned that the day I left Leavenworth, she had moved out of her parents' house into a furnished apartment in town, much to the annoyance of her father. She refused to talk to him, and according to her mother, he didn't know whether to be angry or offended, so he did both. I arrived at the departure point and checked in. The sergeant behind the counter looked at my orders, bowed out, and retired to the office behind his back. A couple minutes later, he returned with the first lieutenant. "Excuse me, Captain Reynolds, but could you please step into my office?" I followed him in. "Have a seat, Captain." He paused to gather his thoughts. "Your orders have been changed. It appears your original order was given in error. Fort Leavenworth is conducting an investigation to find out what happened, but here are your new orders. You are to report to Leavenworth and return to your former duties." He threw up his hands. "I've never seen anything like this. I've seen orders changed, but never one where a serviceman has returned to his former duties. And to top it all off, we received this letter yesterday with a personal courier who was supposed to deliver it to you personally in your hands." It was a sealed envelope with a return address of "To General Command, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas." The lieutenant handed me my new orders. "Congratulations, Captain. You're going home." I went outside and opened the envelope. You were right. That was all it said. It was signed M. Woodley. I pulled out my cell phone and called Christina. She answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" "On my way home. Do you know my orders got canceled?" "You're kidding. What happened?" "Apparently your father changed his mind. I'm going back to Leavenworth." "Oh my goodness. How soon can you get here?" "In a couple days. I have to stop and pick up my truck and then I'll go from there." "Hurry up, honey. I'll start looking for a bigger apartment." The drive back broke all records. We'd been on the phone constantly for the last 50 miles, and she was running toward me when I turned onto the street where she had an apartment. The truck barely had time to stop before I jumped out of it and found myself in her arms. We kissed and cuddled as the vehicle drove around us. Military towns are used to reunions with loved ones happening in unusual places. It took a few minutes before we calmed down and went inside, where we kissed and cuddled for another long time. After the passion subsided, we sat next to each other on her couch and talked. She talked to her mother, but not to her father. Her mother did not know that my order had been changed, but when she was informed of it, was happy for her daughter. I showed her the short note I had received from her father. "What does it mean?" she asked. I told her about my meeting with him the morning I left. "I'm surprised he didn't put you in jail for talking to him like that," she said. "Me neither." "I'm sure it went against everything he holds sacred to change your orders," she said. "He didn't do it for me. He did it for you because he loves you, and it's hard for him to accept that he's no longer the only man in your life." She looked at me with love in her eyes. I looked around, stood up, and pulled out of my pocket the ring I bought in Tennessee when I stopped by to pick up my truck. I got down on one knee. Before I could utter a word, she was crying. "Christina Louise Woodley, will you marry me?" She quickly dropped to both knees, held out her left hand, and said, "Put it on my finger." Once the ring was where it would be for the next 50 years, she spoke again. "Yes, Mark Hadley Reynolds, I will marry you and love you until the day I die." Every man thinks his wife or girlfriend is the most beautiful, perfect creature on earth, and I was no exception. I asked her if she wanted to go to a first-class hotel for our first night together, but she replied in the negative. This apartment is our first home. I want our first time to be in our first home. She had time to prepare for my homecoming, and she did it her way. For our first dinner together in this apartment, we had champagne, pâté, and chocolate-covered strawberries. I even drank some of the champagne. We sat on the bed, eating and drinking. But eventually, we got down to it. Her phone woke us up at 10. "Hi, Mom," she said cheerfully. As she usually did, she put it on speakerphone. "Good morning. Have you heard from Mark? Wasn't he supposed to be back today?" She looked at me and smiled broadly. "He came home last night and spent the night with me, Mom." "Oh, okay then." "He asked me to marry him, Mom, and I said yes." We heard her visibly brighten. "That's wonderful. When will the day come?" Christina laughed. "We don't know yet. We thought we'd discuss it with you and Daddy tonight at dinner. Is that okay with you?" This was news to me, so I just stared at her with big eyes, thinking she was crazy. She looked at me and winked. "That would be great. What kind of wine does he like?" "He doesn't usually drink, but he'll have some champagne with us." "Okay, I'll see you at 6:30. Is that okay with you?" "Great. See you then." "Oh, should I tell your dad? Or would you rather do it yourself?" "You can tell him if you think he can handle it. Otherwise, let Mark handle it." We rang the doorbell at 6:30. The door was opened by her father. "Why did you ring the doorbell? You have a key," he said to his daughter. "I know, but I don't live here anymore, Dad." I saw him wince, but visibly brighten as his daughter hugged him and kissed his cheek. I heard a whispered thank you from her as she kissed him. It wasn't easy for him. He held out his hand for me to shake, and I shook it. "Dinner is on the table, so let's get to it," he said. We were in the small family dining room, not the one reserved for large dinner parties. Christina and I sat on opposite sides of the table. The champagne had already been poured. "Dad, Mom, Mark has something to say." I took a deep breath. "First of all, General Woodley, I'd like to thank you for the help you've given in rescinding my orders." I said it in those terms, knowing full well that he and he alone was responsible for both issuing and subsequently rescinding the orders. "Secondly, General Woodley and Mrs. Woodley, I want you both to know that I love your daughter and have proposed to her." "And I said yes," Christina said, extending her hand first to her mother, then to her father. Her mother oohed and cheered. Her father, I'm sure, was told to take it gracefully and not make a fool of himself. He was kind enough to make a toast. After dinner, both women went somewhere to start making wedding plans. The general and I went to the library where he poured 2 port wine. "I understand you don't drink alcohol except on special occasions. I think this will be 2 of them in one evening." I took a small glass. "Congratulations, Mark. You've done something I never wanted to live to see." He took a small sip and indicated for us both to sit down. I knew it would happen sooner or later, but he changed the mood as he spoke again. "You were right when you criticized me. I thought I knew what was best for my daughter, but when I saw the way she looked at you at dinner, I realized how wrong I was. All I ask is that you take care of her and love her for the rest of her life just as you love her today." "You can count on that, sir. I would never knowingly do anything to hurt her." "I believe that." He looked at me. "But there's one thing I'm having trouble with." "What's that, sir?" "I don't like the fact that you two are living together before you get married." Apparently, Christina's mother had told him that. "You have no choice, sir." "I didn't think so, but I thought I'd give it a try." 6 months after that dinner, Christina's father retired and became the general manager of a major automobile manufacturer's parts purchasing division. 2 months after that, Christina and I were married. She was visibly pregnant as she walked down the aisle. My brother Matthew showed up with his megastar from Nashville, who put on an impromptu show at our reception. He gave Christina's parents copies of all his CDs. Matthew said that my parents only listened to gospel music, so he gave them some copies of his gospel records. The day after we got back from our honeymoon, I got a call from Ernie Bigelow. He congratulated me and told me that he had won $1,000 from two other men who were dating Christina. They had bet him that I would fall on my face like them. Ernie disagreed with them and grabbed some of the money. 2 months after the wedding, Jason Richard Reynolds was born. 6 months after that, I quit my job and went to work for my father-in-law. Almost from the moment he started walking, Jason clung to his grandfather, and they became best friends. My father-in-law was always jealous when we took Jason to visit my parents. During one of our trips to Tennessee, my sister Ruth brought me up to speed on my ex-wife. Turns out, after getting out of prison, she had gotten into a questionable business. One of her best-selling movies was a recreation of her session with two men and her first experience. All was going well until it was discovered that she was mailing some of her artwork through the mail. The federal government looks the other way. So she sits 3 to 5. One weekend, Jason was with Woodley's grandparents at their lake house. Christina and I were home alone, snuggled up against each other on the couch, watching some kind of movie. She turned to me. "Mark?" "Yes?" "Do you like being a father?" "Sure. Why?" "Would you like another baby?" I leaned back and looked at her. "What are you trying to say? That you're pregnant?" "No, but I'd like to." The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked. We could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.